Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Please type in the chat box if you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This is our very first ever monthly special ed webinar series. This is something new that we're trying to do because we wanted an opportunity to present some information and answer questions that may be coming up throughout the school year. We are trying to keep these brief, no more than an hour in length, provide some quick information, and then open up the floor to questions in case you have anything that you would like to clarify. We will start with some brief information, then we're going to go into some updates around graduation and assessment options for students with disabilities. We're going to talk briefly about enrollment reporting, and then we're going to end with dispute resolution options, specifically complaint investigations. At the very end, we'll do a wrap-up, and we're going to do a survey. Tanya is monitoring the chat box for us, and she will add in a link to a survey that will ask you for feedback about ways to change this webinar, as well as topics that would be helpful to you. So we really are interested in getting your feedback, so please stick with us to the end and then think about ways that we can improve. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Glenna Gallo, Assistant Superintendent of Special Education here at OSPI. I am joined today by Janice Torno, who will talk to us about graduation assessment and enrollment reporting, and two complaint investigators, Andrew Stashevsky and Bill Elvey, who are going to talk about the dispute resolution. We also have the Director of Special Education, Tanya May, on the chat, monitoring the chat, as well as other OSPI staff who are available logging on to provide some interaction. So look through the list of attendees and see if there's anything or anyone you want to talk to. We have the chat feature engaged. We also are recording this webinar. So while we won't be posting it publicly, if you want a link to the recording at the end, or if you miss one, just shoot me an email, glenna.gallo@k12.wa.us. Tanya, do you want to drop that in the chat?
Sure. And
we will send you the recording. I just want to take you through just a couple quick things before we move on to the presentation. So the first thing I want you to see, if my screen changes, is OSPI's vision, mission, and values. You can see that we're really focused here on preparing students for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. We are also addressing opportunity gaps and really looking at high expectations for all students. You can see the values that support that, as well as an equity statement that has recently been released from OSPI. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into these because you're going to have them in your handout, and it's more just background information. OSPI Special Ed Services has been changing the way that we've done business over the last year, and we are focused on providing technical assistance and professional development, engaging our stakeholders, administering general supervision, and allocating special ed funding. And so with those services, that is part of why we're rolling out this webinar. Here is a copy of our special ed priorities. I'm not going to spend time during this webinar going over them, but I wanted to make sure that you are aware that we do have these 6 priorities, and this is driving the work that's coming out of our division. With that, you can see the agenda for the next 56 minutes. As we're going to look at the graduation and assessment decisions. We're going to look at enrollment reporting, dispute resolution, and then do the wrap-up and survey. We do encourage you to participate, to ask questions in the chat. That's probably easier than asking them out loud. But if you'd like to, we can take you off mute and you can ask a question out loud also. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Janice to talk about graduation and assessment decisions. And I just quickly need to shift the camera. Hold on 1 second. I'll share. Tanya, can you switch the camera?
Oh, darn.
No. It's not for me.
Okay. All right, so we are having an issue with the camera. You get to look at a picture of me while Janice presents. I apologize in advance for that.
Can you? Perfect. Today we're going to talk about 3 areas that are related to our statewide assessment testing system. We will review the assessment requirements for accountability reporting to the federal government and changes and clarifications around accountability assessments related to students with disabilities. And today, whenever I mention students with disabilities, those are students who are eligible for special education services only. Second, we'll also review the assessment requirements related to graduation and options that are available to students with disabilities. We'll also look at some initial data around how students with disabilities graduate from our high schools. Finally, we'll briefly discuss the 1% alternative assessment cap that is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act and what districts might expect this year. Tanya's monitoring the chat box, so as questions come up, please do not hesitate to ask. If we're able to answer questions during the presentation, we'll make every attempt to do so. And if we're not able to answer the questions, we'll get an answer back to you. So as we look at the topics for today, assessment should be viewed through 2 separate but linked lenses. One is the accountability lens. OSPI collects special education data, which must be submitted annually to the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. 2 pieces of data we submit are participation rates and performance scores on students in grades 3 through 8 and 10, taking our on-grade level ELA and math state assessments. All school districts are required to submit these data. The second lens is graduation. All public high school students are required to meet statewide graduation requirements in order to earn a diploma. We'll review the assessment graduation requirements and what options are available to students with disabilities. So many of you have probably already seen this information on the proficiency and participation rates at either your ESD data dives or perhaps at the WASA OSPI conference. As a quick review, indicators are measures of compliance and effectiveness of a state's implementation of the IDEA. There are 17 federal indicators or measures for all states. Some of the indicators are called performance indicators and some are called compliance indicators. As you can see from the slide, indicator 3, which is a performance indicator, looks at student participation and performance on our statewide assessment. The data are reported by grade groups for both ELA and math across 2 years. The first chart reports participation rates in the Smarter Balance and WA-AIM assessments based on a statewide average of all special education students. The participation rate goal is for 100% participation. However, 95% participation can be viewed as acceptable. As you can see in the 2 years displayed, the state is close to 95% participation for the elementary and middle school groupings. However, there's a sharp fall off down to about 50% for the high school participation rate. At the time these data were reported, the high school grade for accountability reporting was 11th grade. We have heard from many of you that one of the reasons the high school participation rates were so low in 2015 and 16 is that at the time, 10th grade students were allowed to take the state assessment. And if they scored at a level 2, which although not passing for accountability purposes, it was considered passing for graduation purposes for special education eligible students. And the students saw no need to take the test again in 11th grade or the accountability grade because they were just going to fail the test. Since the accountability year has been moved to 10th grade, starting in 2017-18, we expect that the participation rates for high school will increase. However, as a state, we have not achieved a 95% or higher participation rate at any of the grade groupings. So as you review your 2017-18 state assessment data, look for where your participation rates may be either lagging or sagging. The second chart is for indicator 3C, which looks at proficiency rates for students with disabilities. This chart, while structured the same way, compares the proficiency rates for all students in the state with disabilities, or all students in the state compared to just students with disabilities. So just as an overview in terms of accountability requirements, both the federal IDEA and our state regulations specify that IEP teams have the authority to determine how a student participates in the state assessment and identifies 3 options for that participation: taking the state assessment without accommodations, with accommodations, or taking an alternate state assessment. In Washington, the state assessments used for accountability are the on-grade level Smarter Balanced and WA-AIM, ELA and math tests, the science or WA-CAS, and the WA-AIM science assessment, and then also the ALPA 21 and the WIDA for language assessments. Consequently, for accountability purposes, the law says the IEP team has 3 choices: participate in the on-grade level general assessment in reading, math, science, or language without accommodation. Second choice is to participate in the on-grade level general reading, math, science, or language assessments with accommodations. Or the third choice is for the student to participate in the on-grade level alternate assessments. For accountability testing in 2018-19 school year, or this school year, we wanted to review changes or clarifications around the testing requirements. The first one is that all students will participate in their on-grade level assessments during the grades they are to be tested. Students in grades 3 through 8 are no longer able to take off-grade level tests or to use the L2 cut score as a passing grade. High school students must first take the on-grade level assessment in the 10th grade. Second thing we wanted to clarify is that off-grade level and CIA cut score options for the general assessment, again, are options only for high school students who have taken the 10th grade assessment, hopefully in the 10th grade, and those students are trying to fulfill graduation requirements. Off-grade level or CIA cut score options, again, are no longer available to students in grades 3 through 8. And then also, just as a reminder, IEP teams may continue to determine that a student who requires accommodations in an area for which the student doesn't receive special education services, they may determine that the student can have accommodations in those areas or in that area. So moving on to graduation and assessment.
Any questions?
So slight pause here. Do you have any questions?
We did have one that came into the chat box. One of them was, so I shared with them that the assessment data for participation and proficiency are available at the regional level, and that they've been run for every district so that people can request that if they need it. And one of the questions was whether this was the same type of profile that we've been doing in the data dives in last spring. So yes, that is the same. And as we get new assessment data for 17-18, we can update these slides. Someone else is asking right now, confirming there's no level 2 for grades 3 through 8 for accountability.
Yes, that is true.
Because that's a graduation alternative, which I'm sure Janice is going to talk us through a little bit more.
All right, so moving on to graduation. The State Board of Education sets the graduation requirements. You probably remember or noticed that the number of credits needed for graduation recently increased from 20 to 24 credits for the class of 2019 and beyond. Along with the number of credits, the State Board also determines the number of credits per area or content area that are needed. For example, students need 4 credits in English, 3 credits in math, 3 credits in science, and so on. More information about the exact number of required credits in the various subject areas can be found on both the OSPI graduation websites and the State Board of Education website. Do note, though, many school districts do require students to earn credits beyond the state minimum, and students must fulfill all requirements, both those of the state and of their local districts, to be eligible to graduate. In addition to earning high school credits, a student must complete a high school and beyond plan for graduation. For students with disabilities, completing a high school and beyond plan is in addition to having an IEP transition plan. Starting in 2017-18 school year, school districts were required to have students initiate their high school and beyond plans in the 7th or 8th grade. The third graduation requirement is to pass the state ELA and math tests or an approved alternative to those tests. Passing the state science assessment will be a graduation requirement starting with the class of 2021. But the rest of this presentation will really be focused on the assessment requirements for graduation. So before we talk about the changes, clarification, and options available for the assessment requirement for graduation, we did want to remind you about the high school graduations regulation, specifically for students with disabilities. First, you need to know that your district is required to have a policy and procedure related to this regulation. If your district adopted the Washington State School Directors Association, or WASDA's policy and procedure around graduation, your school district policy likely says that it's the responsibility of the IEP team to determine graduation requirements and when a student has met those graduation requirements. You should check your board policy and procedures because this requirement went into effect in 1982, which may be before some of you were born, but you will want to check to make sure your school board policy and procedure is a current reflection of how IEP teams are managing this responsibility. Second, there are 2 very common misunderstandings of or confusion around when a student is ready to graduate. For misunderstanding 1, we know that it's the responsibility of the IEP team to determine when the student has met state and local graduation requirements. Federal and state regulations do not compel a school district to graduate a student with a disability, even one who has met the district-determined requirements for the award of a regular high school diploma. So in other words, a student who has met the cohort credit requirements, passed a state assessment or an approved alternative, completed a high school and beyond plan, and met any LEA criteria, they may continue in the district if the IEP team agrees to continue the student's secondary education and specifies in the IEP what is required for the student to ultimately graduate. If the IEP team determines and documents that the student has not met these graduation requirements, the student is still entitled to a free appropriate public education and can continue to be claimed for basic and special education apportionment. The second common misunderstanding is around modifying graduation requirements. There seems to be confusion around whether the IEP team can modify units of credit or courses towards the graduation requirements. The simple answer is yes. The IEP team can modify course requirements or substitute courses based on the unique needs of the individual student. Such changes should have a direct relationship to the student's disability. These types of changes should also be based on programs and services that will be most beneficial to the student completing their post-secondary goals. And as always, they should be documented in the IEP. So while the IEP team may modify specific units of credit or courses towards graduation requirements, the bolded sentence on the slide indicates that the IEP team is not authorized to waive or exempt a student from the state accountability assessment requirements or the state-approved assessment graduation alternatives.
Special ed directors will want to know how their teams are doing this, if they are, and watch for trends that show patterns of decision making that isn't individualized but is based upon teams themselves.
So we're going to probably fly through these graduation changes or clarifications. The first one is, if a student passes the 10th grade assessment, they fulfill the not only the accountability requirement as long as they took it in the 10th grade, but they also fulfill the requirement for graduation and would graduate with a certificate of academic achievement. For students who don't pass the 10th grade assessment, IEP teams should first consider retakes or the state-approved certificate of academic achievement assessment graduation alternatives. And those alternatives include dual credit courses. There's also something called locally administered assessments that are associated with locally determined courses. Students can take either college entrance or advanced placement tests and satisfy as one of the alternatives, or they can use a GPA comparison. Each of those alternatives is explained in much greater detail on the OSPI website. Once the student has taken the 10th grade assessment, didn't pass, the IEP team determines that retakes or the CAA assessment graduation alternatives aren't appropriate, then the traditional Certificate of Individual Achievement assessment alternatives are available, and those include the CIA cut score, or the level 2, the off-grade level assessment. So a high school student could take either an elementary or a middle school assessment for either the Smarter Balanced or the WA-AIM. Or there's the locally determined assessment, which is like the Woodcock-Johnson, the Wyatt, or the KTEA. And the assessment department has explanations of what grade equivalency a student has to achieve on any of those locally determined assessments. Do remember that the IEP team needs to pick which of the LDA options should be used with the student. Let's see. Number 4 on this slide is just a repeat. The CIA cut score, off-grade level assessment, and LDAs are not options or available to students in grades 3 through 8. And it sounds like we've got a number of questions.
We do. So I'm going to scroll back up to where they started. Okay, so regarding the change in policy for the level 2 and off-grade level, one question is, will there be a letter that's available from the state because parents and IEP teams are questioning the change?
That is a great idea, and we will work with our assessment colleagues to produce something.
Okay, great. And then the next one is, can the high school and beyond plan serve as the course of study on the IEP?
Since the high school and beyond plan does list out the courses, certainly including it, as an attachment or part of the IEP would be certainly an acceptable option. Some districts are using the high school and beyond plan that's in their Skyward or the WSIPSI program. It could be printed out from that particular application. Other districts are continuing to use the paper copy, so either of those options would be acceptable.
Okay, great. And then there's a clarifying question about the total credits. So the total number of credits still need to be the total credits required for the cohort regardless of substitutions, correct?
Yes. However, the State Board of Education does interpret that particular regulation as IEP teams having the ability to also modify the total number of credits that a student earns. There may be, situations where a student attended a class, didn't earn a credit, perhaps because they weren't provided with accommodations, or something like that. That might be an appropriate reason to reduce credits. There's also, school districts do have the authority to waive 2 of the 24 requirements. So IEP teams would want to work very closely with their building principals who have the authority to waive those kinds of requirements.
There's about 3 more.
Okay,
so,
let's go ahead.
Okay. So someone shared that they read on the State Board of Ed website that high school credit can be awarded for work that is at an academic level of 9th grade or higher. So the question is, does this mean that special education classes that are at a lower level would not count toward graduation credit?
No, they count towards graduation credits as long as the IEP team has determined that's the appropriate course for the student to take.
Okay. And then the next one was just asking you to share your comment again regarding the ability of the IEP team to articulate requirements beyond the state and district requirements, and thereby put together a plan that would have a student continue to work toward his or her individualized graduation plan.
So would that be something to be helpful to send out? I can share that that particular statement is it is included or will be included in the 2019 graduation toolkit. There's clarification around that statement.
And that'll be posted soon, correct?
Yes, yes. The 2017 version of this year's graduation toolkit is still up, but they believe that the revised version will be up at the beginning of next week.
Okay. And then the final question we have right now is clarification of students walking in graduation related to Kevin's Law. Understanding the law, which shares students on an IEP can continue to receive service till 21 outside of the recommendation of the IEP.
It's not necessarily outside of the recommendation of the IEP team. It would be at the recommendation of the IEP team. Again, districts are supposed to have policy and procedures around implementing Kevin's Law. And yes, students may in fact participate in the graduation ceremony based on a district's policy, implementing policy and procedure, and continue to receive special education and general education services.
Okay, all right, that's it for now. Thanks for the pause. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, just very briefly, the slide that's up right now is shows you a look at how students are graduating. All students compared to students with disabilities across 4 different graduation cohorts. The data were collected this last year, and certainly what it shows is that the majority of our students are graduating with a certificate of academic or individual achievement. 4,000, if we look at last year, cohort 2017, 4,160 graduated with a CIA, and only 1,763 graduated with a certificate of academic achievement. We're hoping, through continued discussions, recognition of the fact that 90 to 95% of our students certainly have normal or above normal intellectual functioning, that we'll be able ultimately to change those numbers and percentages so many more of our students who are capable are graduating with that certificate of academic achievement. And then the last slide here is on graduation pathways in Washington, and is just intended to give you a visual summary of what the various options are. Then very quickly, the alternate assessment. We just wanted to call to your attention that with the passage of the ESSA, part of that was what's called a 1% cap on students who can be taking the alternate assessment. It used to be that the state could only report 1% of the passing scores on an alternate assessment, but with the ESSA, they changed that to limiting the numbers of students who could participate in an alternate assessment to 1%. That percentage is calculated at the state level, and you can see from the slide that's up there, Washington is also very close and has been also very close to meeting the requirement, 1% requirement, but we are a little bit over. And so based on what the 2017-18 data show, I'm sorry, this is no, it's okay. That's just a narrative explanation about what we're talking about. Next slide. If the state is over 1%, then what districts could expect is that OSPI is required to provide some oversight of the process, and we'd be reaching out to districts asking for evidence that the district followed the state law guidelines for identifying students who participated in the alternate assessment, an explanation or justification about the students who participated, and then also to address any disproportionality that may be in the percentages of students based on the ESSA subgroups that took the alternate assessment. The last next couple of slides just gives you some things to think about, questions to ask. We are working on putting the finishing touches on an updated guidance for IEP teams regarding student participation in state assessments for both accountability and graduation purposes, and that document will be posted. And then we've put it in the monthly update, but just wanted you to know that WAAIM training is scheduled for your ESDs. It's going to be done in 2 sections or sessions this year. The morning session is a general, and the afternoon session is a train the trainer for people who will be doing local training. People are invited to attend both sessions if they would like.
Any questions?
There was just one final one. Is there a sample policy for Kevin's Law?
We could probably find some districts that have policies. Yes, there's not one at the state.
Okay. For people who would like that, I'm gonna put Janice's email up, and I'm also posting right now the link just so that people have it before they have to log on to the survey. My apologies.
All right, we are going to move on quickly to enrollment reporting.
Okay.
And then last is dispute resolution.
So enrollment reporting, when do you do enrollment reporting? The first slide shows you a link or provides you the link to the enrollment reporting document that's on the OSPI website. And that would be something that if you haven't read it, it's just, it's gripping, but it certainly does provide very clear guidance about enrollment reporting. And then if you have any questions, the OSPI enrollment specialist is Becky McLean, and her email is provided. So when do you do enrollment reporting? It's done on the 4th day, school day of September. And it's done the first school day of October through June. And if your school district started in August, the September count still remains the 4th school day of September, not the 4th school day of whatever your new school year was. Where do you report? You report in the EDS system, and there is a specific application that you get to through the SAFS application listing. And this particular slide tells you each link that you would need to press if you're responsible for doing enrollment reporting. The why of enrollment reporting is that the October through June average resident enrollment reported on the P223H is used to calculate special education funding for each school district. Those monthly reports, if there were errors in them, either positive or negative, can be corrected at any time. You typically are going to be reporting your information to the ESD, who also is going to review your reporting. And if you're wondering why you have to report in September, that first point in September, it's so basically SPI can get a sense of how many students are enrolled in our schools out in the state, and that the legislature has sufficiently budgeted for enrollment in the state. Go ahead. Who to report for the P223H or special education enrollment. You report in 3 age categories: age birth through 2, age 3 through 5, and the 5-year-olds are students who are not yet enrolled in kindergarten. Or if you have 5-year-olds who are in kindergarten, they would be reported in that third group, kindergarten to age 21. The student's evaluation and IEP both need to be current. The student needs to have been receiving special education services or related services or early intervention services on or before the count day, but within the prior month, with the exception of September.
Any questions? All right, with that, thank you very much, Janice. I am going to turn it over to Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Stashevsky. I'm a special education citizen complaint investigator here at OSPI. And my colleague Bill and I are going to talk to you about 3 topics today. First, we're going to give you an overview of the citizen complaint process. Then we're going to go over some tips for responding to a citizen complaint. And then Bill's going to discuss information on mediation and other dispute resolution options. So in terms of an overview, it's really a 6-part process. First, an organization or an individual will file a complaint with OSPI. 2 things to note there. Individual is broader than it sounds. It's not limited to the parent of the student that is the subject of the complaint. So, for example, an employee of a school district could file a complaint about a student. The parent of another student could file a complaint. The second thing to note is at the time of filing with OSPI, the complainant will also provide the district with a copy. The second step is that we actually review the complaint, and then we take one of 3 actions. We'll either ask the complainant for more information and or clarification if something is unclear in the documents that have been given to us. We may inform the complainant that the special education dispute resolution team does not handle that particular issue and provide the complainant with the appropriate contact information. 2 common examples that we see are that we don't handle in our particular office are allegations of professional misconduct and disability discrimination. And then the third step is that we would open the complaint if we have everything we need. So for the third step, we're going to mail a letter to the district and the parent stating the issue or issues for investigation. Then the district has 20 days to respond once the complaint is initiated. The fourth step is that OSPI forwards the district's response once we get it to the parent. The parent then has 10 calendar days to submit a reply to OSPI. The next step, step 5, is that OSPI is going to forward the parent's reply to the district. And then finally, within 60 calendar days after receiving a complaint, we're going to issue a decision. Now, there's a couple potential results that would be in the decision. We may find no violation, or we may find a violation. And obviously, if there are multiple issues in the complaint, we could find a violation on some of those issues and a no violation on other issues. If we do find a violation, we have the authority to require a variety of remedies. This list we have here is not necessarily exhaustive. We could require written guidance. We could require a training. We could require an IEP team meeting to discuss a specific topic. We could also order compensatory education. And the final thing to kind of note there is we could order more than one of those if the circumstances warranted it. I'll stop right there maybe and ask if there are any questions.
There's a question about the count that we are gonna respond, but not so far related to this. But if you have questions around this, the timelines or the requirements, I'm still monitoring that.
Great. So there were 3 things we wanted to note on timelines. The first is that the timelines are really important. We're under a very strict 60-day deadline. That deadline can only be extended for, quote, exceptional circumstances. The Office of Special Education Programs, which is a division of the Federal Department of Education, has found that the following do not constitute exceptional circumstances. That would be staff shortages, heavy caseloads, school vacations, and breaks. So it would have to be a truly exceptional circumstance to warrant an extension. Second, the regulations establish deadlines using calendar days, not school days, and so that's something we wanted to highlight here today. And third, you can always submit your response to OSPI earlier than the 20-day deadline. Some cases are going to have multiple allegations, a bunch of facts. You may need all 20 days, but other complaints really deal with one issue that maybe you don't need the whole 20 days to get everything in order. And then with that, we'll go to tips that the team and I kind of have come up that might help you in responding to a complaint. The first is, if OSPI requests the following, please produce all evaluations and IEPs in effect during the 1 year prior to the filing of the complaint. That is our investigation window, the 1 year prior to when we received the complaint. In many cases, a student will have 2 IEPs that were in effect during that 1 year window. And oftentimes the evaluation that informed the first of those 2 IEPs will have taken place before that 1 year window. And sometimes we'll notice districts will forget to provide us that earlier evaluation, and that just helps give us context for what's going on. For the second tip, include a detailed narrative response. I think a couple aspects to that. The first would be deny or admit the allegations made by the parent, address any conflicting information or data, and finally propose a remedy or a corrective action. If you think that OSPI will find a violation, go ahead and propose a remedy or a corrective action. In terms of organizing the response, the 2 kind of formats that we've seen that we think are most helpful is either grouping like documents, so that would be prior written notices as one group, IEPs as one group, evals one group, grouping document types together, or present all the documents in a chronological order. For the next tip, we want to organize emails chronologically and include the email header, so that's the sender, recipient, date, time. And kind of similar to that actually is including page numbers on the response. These tips are all going to help us go through the information more efficiently. It's also helpful if you alphabetize the staff list by the last name. That way we can identify pretty quickly who is the one making the communication. And include a timeline or chronology of events that obviously in this area of education is particularly important and helpful. And finally, redact personally identifiable information for other students. Sometimes emails will have information on the student that's the subject of the complaint and other students, and we would need that other information redacted. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Bill to talk about other dispute resolution options.
Thanks, Andrew. My name is Bill Elvey, and I'm one of the dispute resolution specialists here at OSPI. And I would also like to recognize my 2 other colleagues, Alyssa Fairbanks and Scott Robb, who are also available to consult with and walk through with you about disputes if you need to. As I was listing the dispute resolution options, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to put dispute resolution in the broader context of your school culture, because how you resolve disputes is a good litmus test for school culture. And there's a couple of questions that I'd like for you to think about as we go through the list of of these options. And the first question is what message do you want to send to parents and staff about parent engagement, which includes resolving disputes? The other question is that does it align with your internal processes and training for staffs in terms of resolving disputes? In weighing your options for these disputes, you may want to consider which options are better suited for the different kinds of complaints that you have, and which include is that there could be trust issues, there could be procedural issues, and there could be substantive issues such as methodology questions about this. Some may be better suited for resolving those or the combination of those than others. Regarding complaints is that rather than not engaging the parent in who has filed a complaint, you have the option and are actually encouraged to try to resolve the complaint. And you can do that either through what I call in-house or using an outside neutral. So the first option is mediation, and which is obviously using an outside neutral. And it's mediation is a voluntary process with a neutral third-party trained mediator who will help with communication between the parties and trying to resolve the issues. And if there is an agreement, they will make sure that the agreement is in writing that can be enforced with OSPI. And I want to let you know is that looking at our data, for approximately 50% of the mediations end up with an agreement. And the other thing about mediation, and I should say dispute resolution in general regarding complaints, is that if there's an agreement between the school district and the parent, OSPI may extend the complaint. It's one of those minimal exceptions that Andrew was talking about, but that is something to keep in mind. But again, it's both parties have to agree on extending it, and it's regarding if they're engaged in early dispute resolution. The other option is IEP facilitation, which is a sort of a different process, but it's within the context of having an IEP meeting, and it focuses on IEP issues. There is no written agreement there other than what the IEP comes up with. The other options that sometimes I think people forget about and is in this more simplistic one is a phone call to the parent regarding the issue. Is that again is that initiating that contact is to try to hear what the parents' issues are and talk to them about the complaint and seeing if you can resolve it at that level. The next step would be having a meeting with the parent or whoever has made the complaint and trying to work it out at that level. Doesn't necessarily mean you're required to do mediation or IEP facilitation, but if a meeting would suffice, is it to help resolve it. Kind of a lesser known way or option as far as dispute resolution is a student-led IEP, and obviously is that you have to have some prior involvement of doing the student-led IEP, but it can be a very effective way to resolving a dispute. And I think one of the things that reason why it's effective, that it kind of shifts the focus back to the student and not necessarily on the parties themselves, but it can be a very effective way of doing that. Parent navigators and partners is another way of helping to resolve disputes, including complaints. And they are other parents or community members who can help parents navigate the IEP process. They can provide them information about the process, so they can be invaluable as helping parents to fill that vacuum about what the parents don't know about IEPs and special education. Lastly is that I wanted to mention CADRE, which is the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. And it is really the go-to resource for dispute resolution and best practices. It's an invaluable resource for webinars, all kinds of information for parents, for school districts regarding dispute resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Bill. Can you hear us again?
Nobody's responding.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
We have sound again, Janice.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, we're on. I'm sorry. The question was how to report students in developmental preschool or kindergartners who attend part-time. Any special education student, you report by head count. So the preschooler coming in for 30 minutes of speech service a week, you report them as one, compared to the 21-year-old who is in school for 6 hours a day. You'd also report that student as one on the P223H.
Thanks, Janice. Shirley was asking whether the slides and reporting would be available to participants only or the general population. Just the participants, correct?
The recording is available upon request. We may choose to post the PowerPoint slides on our website, but we haven't decided yet. Information or input regarding the availability and the usefulness of it would be appreciated.
And I posted the survey one last time in the chat box as well.
So thank you so much for joining us. We are exactly 4 o'clock. I do have the room open for the next 15 minutes. And so hopefully at this point you've been able to participate in the survey, provided us input on topics that would be helpful to you in the future. You can see our next webinar is scheduled for October 2nd, in the same time frame. The Zoom is a different Zoom meeting than today's. So if you're planning to participate, please make sure you use the Zoom link that's provided. At this time, we're planning on talking about special ed funding, person-centered planning, student-led IEPs, and building self-advocacy. Based on the input that we received from the survey, those topics may be amended, or if there's something in particular you'd like to see or hear about, please let us know. what we're planning on as we move forward is us providing written information in the monthly updates, and then presenting on topics that we want to get input on or that we think there will be questions on through this format. So again, any input that you have is extremely helpful and useful to us. I apologize for my technical inadequacy today and getting the camera to work for everybody else. That was not my goal, to only have it available on me. And so that's something that we'll work on moving forward. With that, any last questions, comments from the field?
A few comments that they would appreciate the PowerPoint slides.
Okay, so do you want to drop those in?
The PowerPoint one, if it's not too large, there's a limit that I can try.
Okay, I think it's fairly small, so let's see if we can get that to fit.
I think it went through.
Okay, so we have posted that to the chat, so you now have the handout and the PowerPoint slides as a whole available. Any other thoughts or questions?
Just a thanks.
All right, well, at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions about anything you would like to know regarding special education in Washington.
Some people, I think, have signed up. We've had